welcome back to the deep dive. I have to be honest with you, when I first looked at the stack of sources for today, I thought someone had made a mistake.
It really does look like a totally random assortment at first glance.
I mean, seriously. We have film reviews of Anthony Hopkins, a tutorial on mentalism and card tricks, a history of magnetism from the year 1600, and a clinical psychology manual on interpersonal therapy. I was trying to figure out if there was a clerical error.
But no error. It's definitely an eclectic mix, but there is a point to it.
Yeah, because once I started reading, I realized this isn't a junk drawer. It's actually a toolkit. There's a very specific, very tight thread tying all of these disparate things together. Today we are looking at the hidden mechanics of influence.
That is the mission today. We are trying to decode the invisible signals that completely dictate our reality. And whether that is an actor controlling an audience's heartbeat, a magician controlling your quote-unquote free choice, or even the physics of magnetism, the underlying mechanism is surprisingly similar.
It's unsettling, actually, because you walk around thinking you're this independent agent, right, making rational choices based on facts. But these sources suggest you're constantly reacting to inputs you don't even see. We are constantly being steered by biology, by physics, and by narrative.
And we're going to break down exactly what those inputs are. We'll look at concepts like micromotions, the mathematics behind what magicians call forcing, and something behavioral psychologists call habit stacking.
Let's start with the physical stuff.
Yeah.
The body. Because usually when you think of influence or commanding a room, you think of someone taking up space.
Right. The loud guy at the party.
Exactly. Using big gestures. We're taught that high energy equals power. But the first source in our stack, which digs into acting techniques and the architecture of presence, flips that completely upside down. It argues that the most aggressive, powerful way to command a room is to do absolutely nothing.
It's the concept of the baseline of stillness, and to really understand why this works, you have to look at our biology. Think about how most people behave in a high-pressure situation, or just socially.
They fidget.
Yeah, they fidget. They nod while listening to show they're engaged. They shift their weight from foot to foot.
We're constantly broadcasting noise.
Exactly. In the animal kingdom and deep down in our own psychology, that movement is noise. It signals nervousness, submission, or just a lack of focus. It literally tells the other person, I am reacting to you.
So the argument is, if you remove the noise,
you become a blank canvas. The source creates this fascinating paradox. By doing nothing, you don't disappear into the background. You actually heighten the sensitivity of everyone watching you. Because when your baseline is absolute zero, the tiniest movement becomes a major event.
The examples they gave for this were terrifyingly specific. Let's talk about Anthony Hopkins. The source analyzes his performance in Silence of the Lambs. We all know Hannibal Lecter's scary, but this breaks down the physiological reason why. It's not just the biting or the cannibalism.
No, it's what they call the unblinking plateau. Hopkins sustains this near-zero blink rate in that film. It's completely reptilian. But the detail that really caught my attention, and I actually have to go back and watch this, was the nostril microflare.
I saw that too. It's barely visible if you aren't looking for it.
It's maybe a single millimeter of expansion, but because his body is so perfectly rigid, that tiny movement just screams at your subconscious. The source explains that he is scenting the character, Clarice Starling.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it triggers a primal fear response in the viewer because it's pure predatory behavior.
It's weaponized silence. That's what's so wild about it. You don't need to shout to be scary. You just need to be so incredibly still that a nostril flare registers as a massive threat display.
Right, it completely changes the signal-to-noise ratio in the room.
And the source traces this technique right back through history. It wasn't just actors doing this. It was monarchs. Specifically, Queen Elizabeth I.
Oh, she mastered the sculpted audience pose?
She was effectively a living statue, right?
Quite literally. She wore this thick white lead makeup, a stiff collar that physically prevented head movement, and heavy, heavy jewels. She would sit on the throne, totally immobile. The sources describe courtiers literally trembling before she even spoke. They were just waiting for the signal.
And the signal was the drop.
Just lifting or dropping a single finger. When you are that still, a 1 centimeter drop of a finger to signal a pardon or a dismissal is like a thunderclap. It's incredibly efficient. Why waste energy shouting when a micromotion can dismantle someone psychologically?
It reminds me of the section on Gary Kasparov, the chess grandmaster. I mean, I never really thought of chess as a physical sport. You're just sitting down. But apparently he was playing the player, not just the board.
Oh, absolutely. Kasparov used the stone posture, jaw set, hands folded, zero movement. The source notes that this actually spikes his opponent's cortisol level.
Wait, so just by sitting still, he's chemically stressing out the guy across from him?
Yes, it makes the opponent hypervigilant. They were waiting for the predator to strike, and then he used what they called the chin descent.
A 3-degree drop.
That's all it took. Seasoned opponents knew that when Kasparov dropped his chin that tiny amount, just 3 degrees, it meant he had found the winning line.
Before you even moved a piece.
Right. He hadn't touched the board yet. But the psychological defeat was already registered. The game was over before the physical move even happened.
So the takeaway here is that stillness creates a vacuum, and that vacuum forces the other person to fill it with their own anxiety.
Precisely. Nervousness makes people predictable. And that is actually the perfect transition to our next stack of sources on magic and mentalism. Because if you can make someone predictable or control where they look, you can control their reality.
This was the fun part of the reading. We looked at a breakdown of card tricks and a deep dive into a Darren Brown special. And I have to say, looking at the mechanics behind these tricks, it's less about magic and more about hacking the brain's blind spots.
It's all about the illusion of free will. In the trade, they call it forcing. You create a scenario where the participant feels like they have infinite choices, but you've actually designed the architecture so they can only walk through one specific door.
Let's look at the invisible deck trick. I've seen this done at parties and it always floored me. The magician hands you an imaginary deck, asks you to mind picking a card, and then reveals a real physical deck where only your card is face down. It feels impossible.
But the mechanic is strictly logical. It relies on a prepared deck where the system allows the magician to access any card instantly, usually by having them arranged in specific pairs. But here is the thing. The real trick isn't the sleight of hand, the trick is the narrative.
How so? Like the story they tell.
Exactly. If the magician really sells the story, saying things like, hold this invisible deck, be careful not to drop the cards, shuffle them gently, your brain buys into the reality of the camp. You are so busy playing along with the story that you don't scrutinize the invisible deck when it finally appears.
So we're too busy acting to think about the mechanics. It's cognitive load.
Exactly. You're completely distracted by the story. There's another great example in the source with the napkin trick.
Oh, this one seems like something you could actually do at a dinner party tonight. You ask someone to write a word on a napkin, ball it up, and you magically guess it.
And the explanation is almost disappointingly simple. You just hold the napkin against a reflective object. There's a black phone screen resting on the table. You're literally just looking at the reflection.
But you sell it by saying, I'm feeling the vibrations.
Right. By framing it as vibrations, you force the audience to focus on your hand and the napkin itself. They stop looking at the broader environment. You are directing their attention away from the phone. It's just basic optics disguised as mysticism.
But the absolute master of this narrative control has to be Darren Brown. We have the breakdown from his special, The Events, specifically the episode where he predicts the national lottery numbers. Now, spoiler alert, he didn't use psychic powers.
No, this is where the mechanics get really complex. He didn't use a trick deck or a reflection. He used math and crowd psychology.
He started with that experiment with the mouse, right? To prove a point about fear.
Yes. He had a woman choose between several boxes, but he told her one contained a live mouse. And she was absolutely terrified of mice. Because she was in a state of high arousal fear, her choice wasn't random anymore. She avoided certain boxes in a pattern that Brown could mathematically anticipate.
Fear narrows our options. It puts us on rails.
Correct. But the lottery prediction was even more fascinating. He used a group of 24 people. He calls it the wisdom of crowds.
This is a concept that goes back to like 1906, right? Francis Galton.
That's the one. Galton famously observed a contest at a country fair where people had to guess the weight of an ox. Individual guesses were all over the place. Some people guessed way too high, some way too low. But when he averaged all the guesses together, the result was shockingly accurate, within 1% of the true weight.
So the group is smarter than the individual.
Or at least the group's noise cancels itself out. The errors on the high side cancel the errors on the low side. Brown tried to apply this to random numbers. He had the group engage in automatic writing, basically letting their subconscious scribble numbers without overthinking it.
And in the practice run, it actually worked.
They got 3 out of the 6 lottery numbers correct. Statistically, that is wild. It hints at this idea that maybe we have some collective pattern recognition we aren't aware of. Or, at the very least, that randomness isn't as random as we think when human psychology is involved.
that is the really unsettling part. We think we're being spontaneous, but we're actually just following statistical patterns. So we've got stillness controlling the body and forcing controlling the choice. But what about controlling how we actually feel?
This brings us to the film review of The Father.
Yeah, this is a heavy pivot, but the mechanics of influence are surprisingly similar. This film stars Anthony Hopkins again, tying back to our master of stillness. But this time, the director, Florian Zeller, is using disorientation to force empathy.
Right, because usually films about dementia are observed from the outside. We watch the family suffering while the patient is confused. The Father completely flips that. It puts you inside the head of the person losing their grip on reality. And it does it entirely through set design and editing.
The review points out that the apartment keeps changing in the background, but none of the characters acknowledge it.
It's subtle gaslighting of the audience. You're watching a scene, and the kitchen cabinets have changed from blue to crazy. Or a character walks out of the room and comes back in, and it's a completely different actor playing the exact same role.
I can imagine that being incredibly frustrating for the viewer. You'd constantly think you were missing something or losing your mind.
That's exactly the goal. It forces the audience to feel the frustration and confusion that Anthony is feeling. We aren't just pitying him from afar, we are actively participating in his disorientation. It's artistic manipulation.
Using the malleability of perception to bridge the gap between the healthy and the sick.
Precisely. Instead of telling us he's confused through dialogue, the director makes us confused. It bypasses our logic and targets our emotions directly.
Now, speaking of being drawn to things or feeling a certain way about people, let's get literal. Let's talk about magnets. We have a history of magnetism here. And I have to admit, I didn't expect a deep history lesson on physics to be this romantic.
The language of magnetism has surprisingly always been the language of love. The source points out that the French word for magnet is aimant, which shares a root with the verb to love. And in Chinese, the ancient word sushi translates to loving stone.
So, thousands of years ago, people saw a rock pulling iron towards it and thought, oh, that's affection.
They literally couldn't distinguish between a physical force and an emotional connection. Ancient philosophers like Thales actually argued that magnets had souls. Pliny the Elder described magnets as having hands that they used to embrace iron.
It took a long time to separate the hard science from the poetry.
It did. William Gilbert tried in the year 1600 with his book De Magnete. He was the first to really propose that the Earth itself is a giant magnet. But even he got a bit poetic. He called it magnetic coition. He thought this force was what held the planet together, anticipating gravity. He saw it as a binding force of nature, almost like a planetary embrace.
But the funny thing is, we still use that language today. We talk about people having magnetic personalities, and the source perfectly connects this to modern psychology.
We do. Think about the halo effect. Just like iron is drawn to a magnet, we are helplessly drawn to people we perceive as physically attractive. We automatically assume they are intelligent, kind, and capable, even if we have zero actual evidence.
There was also implicit egotism, which I found really strange but fascinating.
That's the idea that we are subconsciously attracted to people who resemble us. Research shows people are statistically more likely to marry someone with a similar name, or the same birthday, or even similar facial features.
That seems a little narcissistic, doesn't it?
It's less about narcissism and more about evolutionary safety. Familiarity implies safety. It's almost like we have an internal magnetic polarity that just seeks out our own reflection.
Then there's the mere exposure effect.
Proximity. Just being near someone repeatedly over time makes them more attractive and likable to us. It's not magic, it's just familiarity breeding comfort. But to us, it feels exactly like a magnetic pull.
It really makes you question the romance of it all. How much of falling in love or making friends is just physics and biology playing out a predetermined script?
That's the big philosophical question running through this whole deep dive. We've been talking about all the external forces, Hopkins, silence, the magician's narrative, magnets pull. It feels like we have absolutely no control over our own lives. Like we are just iron filings moving around a board.
But the final stack of sources is about flipping the script entirely.
Taking the wheel back.
Exactly. We're moving from how we are manipulated by the world to how we can manipulate our own behaviors.
Yeah.
Rewiring the self.
We have a really practical piece on habit stacking. It basically says, look, stop trying to use willpower. Willpower is crap.
I feel personally attacked, but also very seen by that statement.
We all do, because willpower is a finite resource. You run out of it by 2 p.m. Habit stacking hacks the brain by bypassing the decision-making process entirely.
So how does it actually work in practice?
You link a new habit to a micromotion you already do without thinking. You don't wake up and say, I will drink more water today. You say, after I pour my morning coffee, which is an established, unbreakable habit, I will immediately drink a glass of water.
Piggybacking the new behavior onto the old one.
You're building an automatic chain reaction. Your brain doesn't have to decide to drink the water. The physical act of pouring the coffee triggers the next action automatically. You are programming your own autopilot. You are effectively forcing yourself, just like the magician forced the card choice.
That is a brilliant connection. You are designing the architecture of your own day so you don't even have to think about it. And the sources suggest we can apply this same structural approach to our relationships too. We have this systematic review of interpersonal psychotherapy, or IPT.
IPT is incredibly interesting because it treats relationships almost like a movie script. If you're having constant conflict with a partner or a friend, it doesn't just give you vague advice like, you need to communicate better. It asks you to forensically analyze the scene.
Right, movie script technique.
Exactly. You break down a specific dispute line by line. What was the exact setting? What was the tone of voice? And the crucial question, what was intended versus what was actually communicated.
It's like saying, I said X, hoping you'd understand I was exhausted, but you heard Y, which sounded like I was aggressively angry at you.
Spot on. IPT looks for what they call role disputes. That's where our internal scripts just don't match up. I think you're supposed to do the dishes, you think I'm supposed to do the dishes. And we're both operating on entirely different scripts. But the really big one is role transitions.
Moving from one life stage to another.
Right, going from a student to an employee, or from a child to a caregiver for an aging parent, from single to married. Those are the dangerous moments where our old scripts, our old habits just don't work anymore. We get depressed or anxious because we're trying to use an old map to navigate a completely new territory.
And the conflict comes from the fact that we haven't sat down and consciously updated the script.
Right, we are constantly reacting to a reality that doesn't exist anymore. IPT is about sitting down, acknowledging the new roles, and mutually agreeing on the new lines.
So if we look at the whole picture today, whether it's the absolute silence of a chess grandmaster, the forced choice of a magician holding an invisible deck, or a recurring argument with a spouse, it all comes down to awareness.
It really does. We started this deep dive looking at how easily we are influenced. We saw how a tiny nostril flare can terrify us, how a little bit of fear makes our choices mathematically predictable, how literal proximity pulls us towards certain people, like magnets.
But the flip side is that once you see the strings, you can actually start to pull them yourself. You can habit stack your way to a better daily routine. You can rewrite the movie script of your relationship so you aren't just reacting blindly to old triggers.
That's the ultimate takeaway for you listening. We are almost always reacting to stimuli we don't even notice. But if you can pause, if you can find that baseline of stillness within yourself, you can stop simply reacting and start consciously acting.
The power is in the pause.
And here is a thought to leave you with, based on everything we've uncovered today. We cling so tightly to this idea that we are independent, free-thinking agents. But if a raised eyebrow from a queen, or a card forced by a magician, or a simple chemical reaction like magnetism can completely dictate our reality, how much of your free will is actually just a reaction?
Something to think about next time you feel the choice. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. Watch the silence before the movement. We'll see you next time.